Noah was the first to notice the change. He raised an eyebrow as he saw Camille approaching. "You're not the same girl, are you?" he said teasingly, but he couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. "No," Camille replied, her voice calm but authoritative. "I'm not the same girl anymore. And today, I will not let you get away with the crimes you've committed." On a sweltering summer evening in Atlanta, Georgia, the sky was bathed in a fiery red sunset, with the last rays of the day weaving through the ancient oak trees. On the cobblestone path leading to the Crawford estate, where antique crystal chandeliers reflected a golden glow, everything exuded an opulence so extravagant it felt almost unreal. It was a world where stepping in made one feel insignificant. Camille, 18 years old, stood silently next to the old car that she and her father had driven for many years. She adjusted the worn scarf around her neck, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and caution. This was not a place for someone like her. Yet tonight, she was accompanying her father, Henry, a loyal driver who had worked for the Crawford family for over 2 decades, to assist with the grandest event of the year in the area. The old car came to a stop right in front of the grand gates, where intricately wrought iron designs shimmered with gold. The gates slowly opened and Camille caught a brief glimpse of the vast mansion's foyer, where attendants in neatly pressed uniforms were bustling between the distinguished guests. Laughter echoed from afar, blending with the gentle strains of piano music, creating an atmosphere that was both magnificent and alien. Henry, with his solemn demeanour and shoulders worn thin from years of labour, turned to Camille. His voice was soft but serious, carrying a weight of warning. "Remember, keep to yourself. People like us only need the slightest reason for them to try and bring us down." Camille swallowed hard, feeling her father's concern seep into every word. She nodded and followed him toward the staff quarters at the back of the mansion. But from the moment she stepped through the gates, she sensed something was wrong. The unfamiliar gazes of the wealthy guests, the servants, and even the stone statues decorating the garden seemed to be fixed on her. These weren't friendly looks. They were scrutinizing, as if they were silently asking, "Who is this girl? And why is she here?" Camille walked slowly, feeling every beat of her heart. Each step seemed to sink into the cold stone pavement, while the sounds of laughter and conversation from inside the mansion echoed, emphasizing the insurmountable distance between her and this world. Before Camille lay the image of a society she had only known through stories. Lavish gowns, finely tailored suits, and crystal chandeliers reflected in glasses of red wine. All of it was foreign, yet undeniably alluring. She tried to remain calm, but could not stop her gaze from following these scenes, feeling as though she was stepping into a novel in which she was not the main character. In a secluded corner, a group of young men were laughing by the marble bar. They were the center of attention. Among them was Noah Crawford, the eldest son of the family, standing out with his tall stature and sharp gaze. Beside him were Liam and Blake, his 2 close friends, also from the city's upper class. They were all familiar faces at high-profile events, known not only for their family wealth, but also for their cruel jokes aimed at those they considered beneath them. Noah, holding a glass of wine, raised an eyebrow as he spotted Camille from a distance. Leaning toward Liam, his voice carried a mix of disdain and amusement. "Who's that?" Liam smirked, glancing at Camille indifferently. "The driver's daughter. Nothing noteworthy." Noah let out a faint chuckle, his gaze still fixed on Camille. "Don't underestimate her. She might just make this party a bit more entertaining." Blake, the quietest of the 3, merely smirked, seemingly in agreement. From the bar, the eyes of the 3 men stayed locked on Camille, like predators sizing up their prey. Camille didn't notice the attention directed her way. She focused on her tasks, trying not to let the scrutinizing gazes unsettle her. But the growing sense of unease was undeniable. It wasn't just the stark contrast between her and the world around her. It was the feeling of being watched, as though she was no longer a person, but an object to be judged. When her father brought her to the staff break room, he turned back to her once more, his eyes filled with concern. "Camille, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Stay out of trouble." Camille nodded, but deep down, she knew that trouble wasn't always something you could avoid. Sometimes, it found you whether you wanted it to or not. A vague sense of foreboding stirred within her. But Camille had no way of knowing that this night would change her life forever. Inside the Crawford mansion, the air shimmered with the glow of crystal chandeliers and the soft strains of jazz flowing from a grand piano tucked in the corner of the opulent hall. Guests clad in elegant attire, glasses of wine in hand, mingled and laughed, basking in the pleasures of an evening where joy and power seemed effortless. At the white marble bar, 3 young men stood out from the crowd. Noah Crawford, the eldest son of the family, stood at the centre with his tousled hair and air of self-assuredness. Flanking him were his 2 closest friends, Liam, sharp-tongued and armed with a wit that cut like a blade, and Blake, a quiet figure known for his unpredictably daring actions. They were infamous throughout Atlanta, not only for their privileged upbringings, but also for their arrogance and cruel antics. To them, other people weren't individuals, but mere tools for their amusement. Noah held his cocktail glass, his gaze wandering idly over the crowd until it stopped abruptly on a young woman quietly moving through the room with a tray of drinks in hand. Camille, dressed in a simple staff uniform, seemed almost invisible amidst the grandeur surrounding her. Noah raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Tilting his head toward Liam, he spoke in a low voice, just loud enough for his friends to hear. "Who's that?" Liam glanced briefly at Camille, smirking. The chauffeur's daughter, nothing worth noticing. But Noah thought otherwise. He was always on the lookout for something, or someone, to liven up a party, and tonight, Camille was the perfect target. A mischievous grin spread across his face. "I don't think so. Maybe we should see how much she can take." Unaware of the attention she was drawing, Camille focused on her task, carefully weaving through the opulent crowd. She moved as gracefully as she could, trying not to stand out among the wealthy guests. But within minutes, she noticed the 3 young men closing in on her. Blake was the first to speak, his mocking tone cutting through the air and making Camille pause in her tracks. "Hey girl, did your dad teach you anything besides driving cars?" Camille took a deep breath, striving to stay composed. She raised her head, her gaze steady despite the softness in her voice. "I'm studying to become an engineer." Her response drew laughter from all 3 of them. Liam, never one to miss a chance to mock, chimed in with a sarcastic edge. "An engineer? Really? Or do you mean fixing air conditioners in houses like this?" Camille felt her face flush with anger, but she worked hard to keep it from showing. All she wanted was to get away from these men. Taking a small step back, she started to turn, but Noah wasn't about to let her go that easily. "Hold on," Noah said, his tone seemingly gentle but laced with an underlying threat. He reached out and grabbed Camille's arm. "You can't leave while we're still talking." "Can you?" Camille felt her heart tighten. The touch froze her for a moment. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't want any trouble. Please let me go." But her plea only seemed to amuse the group even more. Blake let out a laugh, his smile sharp like the edge of a knife. "Trouble? We just want to give you a night to remember." Noah stepped closer, pulling Camille toward him. This time his voice dropped to a whisper, yet each word struck like a warning. "Why don't you show us your real skills? We could teach you how to serve properly." Camille's breathing grew strained. She tried to pull away, but Noah only tightened his grip. The looks in Liam and Blake's eyes were no longer just mocking, they had turned dark and menacing. Darkness enveloped the scene. Camille glanced around, desperately searching for help, but everyone else was too engrossed in their own merriment to notice. With a swift motion, Noah pulled her toward the back of the garden, a place untouched by the glow of the crystal chandeliers. "Please, don't do this," Camille pleaded, her voice trembling, but her pleas were drowned out by cruel laughter. The sweltering summer nights suddenly turned bitterly cold. Camille felt as though the entire world had turned its back on her, and in that moment, she was utterly alone. Fear began to creep in, taking over inch by inch as the shadows closed around her. In her mind, one question echoed relentlessly. Why me? But instead of an answer, all she received was silence. A haunting, deafening silence. Camille couldn't clearly remember what happened next. Everything was a blur of disjointed fragments, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. All that remained was the fear, the pain, and the helplessness etched into her body and mind. The cold, mocking laughter of her tormentors echoed in the darkness, like sharp blades slicing deep into her heart, leaving a wound she knew would never heal. When it was over, Camille lay curled on the cold ground, the dampness of the summer night seeping through her thin dress and stinging her raw skin. Tears streamed down her face, not just from the physical pain, but from an indescribable shame that weighed heavily on her soul. She felt as though the entire world had abandoned her. Amidst the stillness of the night, the hurried footsteps of Mr. Henry broke the silence, a sound of salvation. He had searched the garden frantically for Camille, growing increasingly worried when she didn't return after completing her task. When his eyes landed on her small, trembling figure lying in the shadows, his heart shattered. "Camille!" He called her name, his voice hoarse with fear. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees, his rough hands trembling as they gently touched her tear-streaked face. Camille couldn't speak. She could only sob in her father's arms. Mr. Henry held her tightly as though trying to shield her from the cruelty of the world. As the father and daughter left the mansion, the atmosphere in the car felt suffocating. Camille tried to suppress her sobs, but they still escaped, echoing in the confined space. Mr. Henry said nothing, his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead, but his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Finally, in a weak and broken voice, Camille whispered, "It was Noah, Liam and Blake." Her words cut through Mr. Henry's heart like a dagger. He didn't need to ask further. He knew exactly who she was referring to. They weren't just wealthy boys. They were the sons of Atlanta's most powerful family, the Crawfords. Mr. Henry tightened his grip on the wheel, his teeth clenched. Anger swirled within him, urging him to turn the car around and confront them. But reality was all too clear. The Crawfords were not just rich. They wielded immense influence across the city. To go against them would mean certain ruin, not just for Camille, but for their entire family. "There's nothing we can do, Camille," he said, his voice hoarse, nearly breaking. Camille looked at her father through tear-filled eyes, her gaze full of despair. "But they did this. How can I stay silent?" Mr. Henry pulled the car over to the side of the road, placing a hand on Camille's shoulder, his eyes filled with pain. "If we speak out, they will destroy you. Destroy all of us. I can't let that happen. I just want to protect you." Camille could hear the anguish in her father's voice, but his words only made her feel smaller and more powerless than ever. How could a father protect his daughter by asking her to remain silent? The rest of the ride home was silent. Camille sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the window as tears continued to stream down her face. The streetlights flashed by, but she no longer registered anything around her. It felt as though she was sinking deeper into a black hole where no light could ever reach. When they arrived home, Mr. Henry helped Camille into her room, gently laying her down on the bed as if she were a child. He pulled the blanket over her trembling body before pausing at the doorway. Turning back, he looked at his daughter. "I'm sorry, Camille. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." His words echoed in the night, but Camille didn't respond. She lay there, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, her heart weighed down by darkness. That night, Camille knew her life would never be the same. The pain wasn't just in what had happened, but in the helplessness she and her father felt. She understood that facing the Crawford family was impossible. They were too powerful, too untouchable, and that only deepened the bitterness inside her. But somewhere within her, a small flame began to flicker. It wasn't the desire for immediate revenge, but the resolve to never let herself fall apart. Camille vowed that one day when she had the strength and the means, she would seek justice. And on that day, no one would silence her again. Camille's story is just beginning. Don't forget to follow our channel to see how her journey unfolds. The months following the attack were a series of endless, haunting nights. Camille felt like a ghost, silently drifting through life, burdened by an unbearable pain. Rumors about her quickly spread across Atlanta. False stories, malicious whispers, each painted with exaggerated details, spiraled out of her control. She wasn't just facing the disgrace orchestrated by the Crawford family, but also the judgmental stares and gossip from those around her. It seemed as though with every passing day, Camille became more trapped in a society that offered her no welcome. Her efforts to preserve her dignity were crushed under the immense weight of wealth and power. People like Noah, Liam, and Blake were not the only enemies she faced. The world itself, where power shielded crimes, had pushed her into a dark corner from which she could see no escape. But Camille was strong, though she didn't realize it at the time. She felt Atlanta's oppressive grip tightening, like an iron cage that would never open. And then, one day, she decided she couldn't live like this anymore. She had to leave. She had to find a new life, a fresh start, even if it meant venturing into a place unknown. With just a suitcase and a heart full of doubt, Camille left Atlanta. Chicago, a bustling city with endless streets and boundless opportunities, became the place where Camille hoped to find the freedom she so desperately sought. Starting over, she took a job as a waitress at a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. The wages were modest, and life was a struggle, but at least she could feel a sense of independence, a life without judgment, or the confines of a world ruled by wealth and power. The following months were grueling as Camille faced what felt like insurmountable challenges. Each day brought a new test, from earning enough to pay her rent to finding the time to study for the greater goals she had set for herself. Yet she never gave up. Camille knew that survival wasn't enough. She needed to rise to reclaim control over her life. One day, after overhearing a story about a renowned lawyer in Chicago, Camille decided to seek out Mrs. Helena. Known not only for helping the underprivileged, but also for her courage and unwavering commitment to justice, Mrs. Helena was exactly the kind of person Camille hoped could help her. Without hesitation, Camille decided to meet her and share her story. Mrs. Helena listened, her face devoid of doubt or judgment. She simply sat there, absorbing every word, her eyes full of understanding as if she had known Camille would come and already knew how she could help. Then she spoke, her voice warm, yet resolute. "Your survival isn't the end. It's the strength to begin again. You are capable of more than you think, Camille. From this darkness you will shine brighter than ever before." Those words from Mrs. Helena were etched into Camille's memory. In that moment, it felt as though a fire ignited within her. She realized that Mrs. Helena had opened a new door for her, a path toward healing and justice. Camille decided to pursue her dream, studying law, not just to fight for herself, but to stand up for others who had endured cruelty and injustice. Camille enrolled in basic law courses, despite her meager wages as a waitress and her limited time. She spent every spare moment studying. Every law book, every lecture became a source of strength for her, a remedy for the wounds that could not be seen. Those grueling days were far from easy, but Camille felt herself growing stronger. She no longer just wanted to survive. She wanted to fight for justice, for the victims who had no voice, just like she once had been. Over the years, Camille proved herself. She became an exceptional attorney, a name that soon became known throughout Chicago. No longer the fragile girl from Atlanta, she had transformed into a warrior, resilient and fearless. Camille emerged as one of the fiercest advocates for victims of violence, abuse, and injustice. Every case she took on carried a unique power. The fight for justice, not just for herself, but for all those who had been abandoned, for those whose voices had been silenced. She was a lawyer who fought not just with logic, but with her heart. Camille's words in the courtroom commanded attention, compelling others to reflect on the meaning of justice. She had become a force of strength, no longer allowing her past to define her. Instead, she became a beacon of hope for victims abandoned by society, for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Camille knew her journey was only beginning. When Camille looked back at everything she had endured, she understood that the scars would never completely fade. But rather than let them define her, she used them as a driving force to change the world. Once again, Camille proved that while life may knock you down, only you can decide when to stand back up. And when you do, you'll rise stronger than ever before. Camille's story is a testament to the power of resilience and courage. She didn't just fight to survive, she fought to ignite a flame of hope for others. Her story is not merely about survival, it's about the ability to recover and rise from the shadows to create a brighter future. And now, Camille knows that nothing can stop her. She has found her strength, and with it, she will never return to where she started. She will continue to fight for justice, for the oppressed, for all those who have never had the chance to be heard. Camille's story has never truly ended. 10 years had passed since the day Camille left Atlanta, carrying with her deep wounds but also a burning desire, a desire to seek justice for herself and for others like her. Today, Camille returned to the city she once fled, but this time, she was no longer the timid girl she used to be. She had transformed into someone entirely different. A fearless lawyer who had overcome every challenge to stand tall and fight for victims of violence and injustice. The Crawford family, the very people who had inflicted so much pain upon her, were hosting a grand gala at the mansion Camille could never forget. She stood outside the towering gates of the Crawford estate, gazing up at the high walls adorned with solid stone pillars. The golden light from crystal chandeliers spilled through the massive windows, illuminating the opulence and power within. But this time, Camille felt no fear. She no longer felt out of place as she once had. She stood firm, her eyes sharp and confident, like a warrior ready to enter a battle she was destined to win. Camille had prepared for this moment for an entire decade. She wasn't here to merely attend a lavish gala. She was here to force the Crawford family into an unavoidable reckoning. Behind her composed demeanor and striking beauty lay a flawless plan, meticulously crafted step by step, leaving no room for error. Over the years, Camille had gathered ample evidence of the corruption, financial crimes and illegal activities perpetrated by Noah, Liam and Blake. She had collaborated with investigative journalists, connected with non-profit organizations, and reached out to those who had been wronged by the Crawford family. Through her relentless efforts, Camille had unearthed secrets that the city had kept hidden for far too long. She knew that justice was never easily achieved, especially when confronting powerful figures like the Crawford family. But Camille was no longer afraid. She understood that the truth would be her most powerful weapon in this battle. This time, the oppressors who once held all the power would no longer be untouchable. She would make sure everyone saw them for who they truly were. That night, the Crawford mansion stood like a fortress, but Camille knew this was the moment she would bring it all crashing down. The gala began, guests arriving from all over, but Camille paid no mind to the lively chatter or curious stares. She was here with one purpose: to expose the truth. As she entered the grand hall, all eyes turned to her. No one recognized the woman standing before them. Camille was no longer the timid girl of the past, but a strong, confident, and resolute woman. She moved through the crowd with an unwavering gaze, unshaken by the weight of the moment. As part of her plan, Camille approached a prominent journalist she had discreetly invited to the event. She didn't just want the media to hear her story. She wanted them to uncover the reality behind the glitzy facade of the Crawford family. The journalist looked at Camille with surprise, but the curiosity and determination in her eyes made it impossible to refuse. "I'll do it," the journalist said, her gaze firm with resolve. "We'll expose everything." Camille began to loosen her grip on the tension in the room, skillfully planting seeds of doubt in conversations with influential attendees. The carefully guarded secrets of the Crawford family, hidden for years, began to unravel. She didn't say much, but every word she spoke carried weight, and every look she gave compelled people to think twice. At that moment, Camille spotted 3 faces she would never forget: Noah, Liam, and Blake. They were gathered around the bar, drinks in hand, wearing their trademark smug smiles. Camille moved toward them, her steps measured but resolute, like a chess player approaching the final calculated move of a match. Noah was the first to notice the change. He raised an eyebrow as he saw Camille approaching. "You're not the same girl from back then, are you?" he said mockingly, though a flicker of unease flashed in his eyes. "No," Camille replied, her voice calm yet commanding. "I'm not the girl I once was. And today, I won't let you escape the crimes you've committed." The 3 men laughed, but their confidence began to falter. Camille didn't need to raise her voice or create a scene. She had spent years preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, building relationships with the media, and meticulously planning her strategy. Now it was time for these men to face the truth. By the end of the night, the media had everything they needed: documents, testimonies, and undeniable proof to expose the Crawford family's web of corruption. Stories of power manipulation, illegal activities, and decades of hidden crimes were brought to light. Camille had succeeded in toppling those who once seemed untouchable. But more importantly, Camille had reclaimed justice for herself and for other victims who had suffered in silence. She wasn't just a victor, she was a symbol of resilience and justice. Camille had proven that no one could remain in the shadows forever, and that one day the light would shine on everything. As the night came to an end, Camille gazed up at the sky, knowing that while this victory had been hard won, it was just the beginning. She had fought to reclaim her power, and now she would continue her journey, fighting not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced. The opulent banquet turned into an unforgettable nightmare for the Crawford family. Just hours after Camille left the mansion, a series of meticulously crafted articles were published overnight, sending shockwaves through Atlanta. Accusations of corruption, abuse of power, and heinous crimes committed by Noah, Liam, and Blake were no longer mere rumours. They were laid bare before the public in brutal and undeniable detail. The articles, precise and thorough, exposed acts of violence, illegal deals, and the manipulation of power that the Crawford family had worked tirelessly to conceal for years. Immediately, a wave of public outrage swept across the city. Social media platforms were flooded with debates and criticisms, as those who had been affected and victims of these misdeeds began to speak out. Calls for justice grew louder, demanding punishment for the disgraced figures who had once basked in glory. Law enforcement acted swiftly, but this was more than just an investigation. Camille did what she had always dreamed of. She formally filed charges against Noah, Liam, and Blake. It was a harsh blow to their facade of power and deceit. When the trial commenced, Camille was no longer the small, fragile girl the Crawford family had once dismissed. She stood firmly on the witness stand, her eyes ablaze and her heart brimming with determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for all the victims who had been silenced by the Crawfords. Those who never had a chance to speak out. Camille knew this battle wasn't just about seeking justice for her own sake, but also about inspiring hope for those who had suffered in silence. Over the weeks of the trial, Camille faced grueling cross-examinations and clever defences from the Crawfords' high-powered legal team, but she never faltered. Every word she spoke, every testimony she gave was delivered with clarity and an unshakable force. She recounted all that she had endured, not just the horrific acts, but also the cruelty she faced afterward, the judgment of society, and the feeling of abandonment. She left no detail unspoken. Camille described the dark moments in the mansion's garden when darkness had consumed not only her body, but also her soul. With each word, her story pierced through the courtroom, igniting a fire within other victims, those who had been crushed under the weight of powerful figures like the Crawfords. They too began to find their voices, inspired by the light Camille had brought into their darkness. The days in court were anything but easy. Camille faced sophisticated legal maneuvers and relentless tactics to discredit her, but none of it could shake her resolve. She had endured a life full of challenges, and now she wasn't just fighting to survive, she was fighting for justice. Each time Mrs. Helena, who had become her mentor and guide, assisted with legal arguments, Camille felt a renewed sense of strength. Helena's encouragement wasn't just motivational, it was a reminder that justice would prevail. Throughout the cross-examinations, as Camille faced probing questions from the Crawfords' legal team, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Every question, every argument felt like a trial in itself, but Camille knew that the truth would ultimately come to light. She had not only evidence on her side, but also an unwavering belief in the values she was fighting for. Confronting the lies and manipulations of the Crawford family, Camille stood firm, like a victor long determined to rise against the powerful. Every statement she made, every piece of evidence she presented, was met with the full attention of the judges and the jury. She made them reconsider, forcing them to view everything from a perspective the Crawfords had worked so hard to suppress. Finally, after weeks of tension, the trial drew to a close. The courtroom fell silent, as though collectively holding its breath in anticipation of a verdict that would change lives. The jurors, aware of the weight of their responsibility, delivered their decision. As the judge began to read the verdict, everyone in the room sat frozen in anticipation. The Crawford family, with all their arrogance and power, could never have imagined this day would come. The words rang out, resonating in the ears of everyone present. Guilty. Noah, Liam and Blake were convicted for their acts of corruption, violence and abuse of power. The sentences handed down were severe. They would face long years in prison, stripped of the power and wealth they had once believed were theirs by right. The once privileged sons of affluence now had to confront the justice they had worked so hard to evade. Camille stood in the courtroom, her emotions indescribable. But she knew the most important thing was this victory, not just for herself, but for every victim the Crawford family had destroyed. Justice was no longer an abstract concept. It had become a reality, and Camille was the one who had brought it back to this society. As the trial concluded, Camille stepped out of the courthouse, the sunlight shining down on her face, as if affirming that she had reclaimed her power. All eyes turned to her, not because she had won this case, but because she had faced the darkness head-on and never backed down. She knew this battle was not the end. Justice was only beginning, and Camille would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for all those who had been oppressed, for those who couldn't find their own voice. She had risen, and now she would help others rise with her. As she walked outside, Camille was not just a victor. She was a symbol of strength, of light in the darkness, and of a justice that would never again be forgotten. After weeks of tension and drama in the courtroom, the moment Camille had waited for all these years finally arrived. The courtroom fell silent, the atmosphere stretched taut, like a tightened string, as the jurors prepared to deliver their verdict. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, all eyes fixed on the judge who was about to determine the fate of Noah, Liam, and Blake. The once smug faces of the men who had symbolized wealth and influence in Atlanta's elite circles now braced for the inevitable. When the judge read the verdict, his words rang out decisively, carrying an undeniable weight. Guilty. Noah, Liam, and Blake were found guilty on multiple charges, including assault and corruption. The crimes they had committed were no longer hidden, no longer concealed under the veil of power. They had been exposed, and now the three men who once sat at the pinnacle of wealth and authority were forced to confront the price of their actions, years in prison and a life forever altered. The Crawford family, once a pillar of business and influence, was now a symbol of downfall. Their wealth was seized, their networks unraveled, and the reputation they had painstakingly built over the years was shattered by their own misdeeds. It was not just a financial collapse, but the destruction of a world they had tried to sustain through lies and manipulation. Society now viewed the Crawford family as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above justice, no matter how rich or powerful they may be. With that verdict, Camille not only reclaimed justice for herself, but also for all those who had suffered in silence. The victims who had been trampled upon by the Crawford family for so many years could now breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the truth had finally come to light. With this victory, Camille became a symbol of strength and resilience. She had fought not just for herself, but for those who had been overlooked, oppressed, and forgotten. Camille's story stood as undeniable proof that, while life may knock you down, with persistence and inner strength, you can always find a way to rise and triumph. She had turned her pain into power, and the cruelty of her adversaries had only fueled her determination. Standing at the witness stand, Camille stood tall, her radiant gaze showing no trace of fear or past wounds. Everyone in the courtroom felt the immense strength emanating from her, a strength not derived from wealth or power, but from courage, truth, and justice. She had fought not only for herself, but for all those who had no voice. As the trial ended and the verdict was delivered, Camille felt a new energy surge through her. She was no longer the fragile girl of the past. She was a powerful woman who had not only achieved justice, but also torn down the walls of injustice. Every step Camille took from the courthouse back to her home was a step forward on the solid path of victory. She knew she had transformed her own life, but more importantly, she had also changed the lives of others like her. She was no longer just a victim of the powerful. She had become someone who stood up against them all, a leader who opened doors of opportunity for others. No one could go back and change Camille's past, but now she held the reins of her future. And that was the most important thing. Walking out of the courthouse, Camille no longer felt burdened. Each step she took felt light, as if the whole world was supporting her. This victory was not about personal revenge. It was a triumph for justice. She had restored the truth for everyone and achieved what so few could, standing up and fighting against those who believed they were untouchable. Those who had once wielded power and wealth to oppress others now had to face the consequences of their actions. Camille knew this was just one part of her long journey. While the Crawford family had been brought down, the world still harbored many injustices, and many people remained silenced. With her strength and perseverance, Camille was determined to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for all those who needed justice. She stood as proof of one undeniable truth. When you rise, nothing is impossible. Resilience, courage, and justice will ultimately prevail. Camille had demonstrated that every challenge can be overcome if you refuse to give up. She looked ahead, a soft smile gracing her lips. This was only the beginning. After Camille's landmark victory against the Crawford family, she didn't stop at reclaiming justice for herself. She decided to do something far greater for her community. Confronting the pain and loss she had endured, Camille realized she could use her power and influence to help others, those who had no voice and could not defend themselves. Thus, she founded Justice Rising in Washington, D.C., a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of violence and abuse, especially those oppressed within minority communities. Justice Rising was not just a relief organization. It became a symbol of strength and resilience, a beacon of hope for those struggling to reclaim their justice and dignity. Camille traveled far and wide, attending conferences, speaking at schools, and sharing her experiences with various organizations, inspiring thousands of people to strive for change. Her story became not only a source of inspiration, but also a lesson in recovery and inner strength. She proved that no matter how harshly life knocks you down, as long as you refuse to give up, you can always find the light at the end of the tunnel. One day, while sitting in her office at Justice Rising, Camille received a letter. It was from a young girl who had endured the same kind of pain Camille had once faced. The girl wrote that because of Camille's story and her resilience, she had found the strength to stand up for herself, to no longer remain silent, and to refuse to accept oppression. The letter brought tears to Camille's eyes. She set it down gently, overwhelmed by a surge of new strength rising within her. Despite all the hardships she had endured, Camille knew her journey was far from over. She realized that every story she shared, every effort she made, not only transformed her own life, but also ignited hope in those still struggling in the shadows. Letters like this one were more than recognition. They were proof of the power of sharing stories and life lessons. Camille understood that when one person stands up, they can inspire millions to rise alongside them, fighting together for a better future. Her story was no longer just her own. It had become a collective victory for the community. From the darkest nights to days filled with radiant hope, Camille had demonstrated that justice was not merely a battle fought in courtrooms. Justice was about recovery, about the ability to rise after being crushed, about the determination to rebuild one's life, and ultimately about societal change. Camille's efforts were not just about reclaiming justice for herself. They restored faith in humanity, in the values of courage and perseverance. Looking out over the Chicago skyline, Camille smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. She had triumphed, not just for herself, but for all those who had been forced into silence. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who has reclaimed her voice, and Camille stood as living proof of that truth. Camille's story is not just a tale of justice. It is a profound lesson in resilience, recovery, and societal transformation. Camille endured challenges that seemed insurmountable, yet instead of letting them defeat her, she used them as fuel to build a brighter future for herself and others. The most valuable lesson from Camille's story is the unwavering power of resilience. No obstacle is too great if you believe in yourself and your ability to create change. Remember, no matter where you are or what you're facing, perseverance and determination will lead you to victory. This story also underscores the importance of sharing personal narratives so that every lesson and every pain endured can have meaning. Just as Camille did, confronting the truth and finding the courage to speak out may not be easy, but it is the only way to create change and make a difference. Don't let silence or fear hold you back. Stand up and share your story, because you never know who might be inspired by it. Recommendation: share this story with your friends, family, and community. Especially if you are part of the African American community, feel the pride in the rich and powerful cultural heritage you carry. These stories are not just memories, but valuable life lessons about resilience and the strength of community.